Well, first of all, apologies if it seems like we're jumping back in time, because we've already done Anakin and Jinn and sort of their time on Tatooine. But I just want to emphasize a few more points before we get, obviously, to the great final sequence with Darth Maul. And that's clearly the highlight with the Duel of Fates playing. But I do want to emphasize, although I'm very critical of Jinn, I do think the real villain of this whole piece, at least for this film, is really Yoda and his dogmatism. If you follow the Star Wars story and various comics and even the TV show, it becomes very clear that Yoda was very well aware that something was happening and that he had premonitions, but he was just so dogmatic and just didn't want to listen to Jinn or his warnings or the obvious signs that things were going to change radically. But just because Yoda is the quote-unquote bad guy of the film, I don't think necessarily Jinn is a good person. Yes, he looks like Jesus, and there's an obvious religious allegory, which I'm not going to pursue completely here, because obviously that's a separate thing, but there's no doubt he looks like a Christ figure, but a weird Christ figure, because he's much more corrupt. He does at least still believe partly in the Jedi Order, so he doesn't want to completely divorce himself from it, but I mean, he does so much ugly stuff. He bankrupts Watto. He leaves behind Shmi. He steals Anakin. He lies. He cheats. He talks down to Padme. He manipulates people. He barks orders at Panaka and Obi. He clearly has his own kind of sins that he has to atone for. And I think that's why the Darth Maul sequence at the end shocked me so much more because of Maul, because I liked him more. But I was kind of wondering, like, why did Jinn die? It seemed normal that Maul would be the better swordsman and that kind of thing. But why did Jinn die the way he did? I think he is giving himself to the Force, but what is he dying for? And again, if you look closely at the dialogue, he admits it, saying to Anakin, I wish it were not true that Jedi can't die. But he clearly feels a premonition that he will die himself, but he's accomplished his mission of getting the Chosen One through the metachlorian count. But I don't think we should necessarily say a complete positive, because what he does to get to him is pretty ugly and disgusting, but at least in his mind, the Chosen One will rectify all these problems that the Jedi are both sort of contributing to, but also partly resolving. I mean, there's this central contradiction when they do go to Coruscant, that the Jedi are never supposed to be political, but they're in the capital city and the capital world. And even though they're supposed to be pursuing knowledge and understanding, they basically are weapons, and they do use weapons themselves, like the lightsabers, and act in political matters like the Naboo crisis. So it's sort of like this central contradiction that Jinn recognizes, but the other council members just don't want to face up to. And Yoda's sort of like this head mafia boss, and Mace is his like enforcer. Now, obviously, this is not Goodfellas like with Paulie, because those people are almost completely evil. And yes, there's a romanticism to how they pull off their gangsterism, but I don't think Scorsese ever hides that these are pretty thoroughly evil people, even if they're stylish. But Yoda's a little different. He's not pure evil in the way that Palpatine is, but he sort of just excuses the evils that the council does, sort of as like, well, that's necessary, or really, what's the alternative, and that kind of thing. I guess for my problem is that even in the original, the drama just wasn't there, because during the Tatooine sequence, like, what exactly is going to keep things going? Yes, Darth Maul shows up, they have a great little fight, but there's nothing really dramatic to get the audience excited, because basically Jinn is just doing a lot of hustling and trading, which I get in terms of the plot. But it seems to me they just had a lot of missed opportunities. For instance, there's this great sequence where we see Panaka in this red shadow. Now, I didn't want Panaka to be turned into a villain or anything, but I did think there was a great kind of twist they could have pulled off by having, a spy on board with them, or one of the handmaidens was working for Palpatine. Again, they just could have done something that would have really improved things, either there or in Coruscant, by having Padme sort of being watched by spies or assassins. But George really wants to let the dialogue do a lot of the work, and it does, especially he does a lot of great composition and framing, but it just seems like there just isn't enough drama with the Tatooine sequence. We don't get this full impact of Anakin being angry that he's a slave, and that, yes, he's grateful that the Jedi are taking him in, but that they're manipulating him, and that they're so clearly deceiving and lying into him. Even Jinn has to be sort of upset even after he presents this evidence that the Sith are back, and Anakin's the chosen one. He gives them his evidence, and they're like, yeah, we're still not going to train them. Yeah, we don't believe you. Sith, no, they're extinct. And it's like they're completely blind to the truth, even when they have complete empirical evidence before their eyes. Like Yoda's, they're like, well, the dark side is so hard to see. We'll investigate it. And all this very bureaucratic nonsense, because they just don't want to concede, like, well, maybe Jinn is right, and maybe we have lost touch with the Force. Maybe we do need to look at the prophecies more. They're sort of just like, no. George does a lot of great foreshadowing in a literal sense, because we do see Anakin just staring at them with complete hatred and shadow, and that beautifully anticipates what's going to happen in Revenge of the Sith. But again, so as crunchy and as gritty and as good as those little dialogue scenes are between the Council and Anakin, and them constantly probing him and him being very sharp back, it still isn't really dramatic enough to really get the point. I mean, I can see it now that there's this great kind of trinity happening where both Obi and Anakin have to choose between, quote, two masters, either Yoda or Jinn. And obviously with Anakin, he's going to choose Jinn because Yoda hates him. But Obi is still sort of indoctrinated. He really wants to believe that, basically Qui Gon is to blame. I mean, the Council must be more wise. Yoda would not lie to him. Yoda is all-knowing. Mace is a good person, all this kind of stuff. He just babbles over and over again. Do not upset the Council, Master. Do not defy them. He never provides reasoning. He's just a little kid. Like, how would he know this? How would he know the whole history of the Jedi? And, Qui-Gon has to be very nice and nod and say, yes, of course, okay. Yes, you'll be very wise in the future, Obi-Wan, but not today. You still have a lot to learn. So there's this great back and forth in terms of, he's not trying to defy the Council. It's just that clearly they're sort of reaching their sort of limit within themselves, within the system, of not improving it, but making it a lot worse. But we can't hide it. The real kind of thing that really weighs everything down is the Naboo subplot with, Padme accidentally discovering, oh yeah, Jar Jar, you're from a warrior race. Well, maybe we'll need that in the future. I get it in terms of the plot and having to make that a necessity of this alliance just to get to the end fight. But it's just too clumsy. We can see that Palpatine is clearly manipulating her and that she doesn't really know what's going on. She's just going back and forth between these rooms. She's listening to his device. He's very suave and really explaining how the bureaucrats have taken over. And again, there's complete truth to what he's saying. He's just not giving the full story that he engineered the crisis, that the Trade Federation is working for him, that he's Sidious and all these things. But yeah, she's just so far behind the game that he thinks he knows every move she's going to make, but she ends up surprising him by just returning to Naboo and setting up the final sequences with the battle fights. And obviously that's going to be very reminiscent of Return of the Jedi. All that is very well laid out, but again, you just don't feel the drama when she turns on the Chancellor or when she sort of surprises Palpatine. It just feels very routine, Palpatine gains more power. They just needed a little thing. I'm not saying they needed a lot of action scenes, but they needed something to show the power of the intrigue and the politics going on behind the scenes. Because, when the Council just reverses itself, says, oh, okay, you need to go back to Naboo. You're like, wait, what? I thought Anakin was dangerous. I thought you didn't believe in the Sith. It's like, oh, we'll investigate that. It's like, what happened? And you look at the deleted scenes, they do help out a little bit by providing more context, but they don't really resolve this. What exactly is the issue? Do they not believe Jinn? Do they not believe in the prophecy? A lot is really not explained. So there's a great raising of intensity of the drama, but you're still not clear about what the stakes are. I mean, you have to really go back and pay close attention to the dialogue to get oh, yeah, they're so corrupt that they probably think yeah, let's just send Jinn to his death. Hopefully he'll get himself killed along with Obi-Wan. We can just shut this case and just forget about everything, the Sith, Anakin, and just go on with our business. So I think that's a more cynical interpretation, but I think there's enough there to say that, yeah, the Jedi are just completely indifferent to what's going on and just hope that basically everyone just shoots themselves to death and they can just move on to other things. But for my money, there still needs to be a little bit more work with the script. This middle part really just drags, and obviously the final set of scenes really redeem it by being so action-filled and having so much drama. The intensity of losing Jinn and Obi-Wan fighting Darth Maul, as well as even the Anakin scene in Jar Jar. I mean, they're obviously the lesser scenes because they're just too silly. They're meant more for the child audience, but I think overall they do bring it to a really good conclusion and resolution. But I think, again, the parallels are there and the Kubrick kind of influence is there, and it's all well laid out in the dialogue. But I just think, aside from the framing, the good cinematography, the shadows, it doesn't really do that much, because if you're not really into the story all the way through, you're going to be just nodding off a little bit, saying this is dragging up on too long. There's just way too many shots of the airplanes, of the speeders, and all this stuff. And I get it, you want to have the full sense of the city, but it just felt like he still didn't quite know how to structure what the plot should be doing at this point. So the characters are good, their rivalries are very interesting, but it's not coming across as strongly as the first initial scenes of the film or the final scenes. So yeah, it's still a really great film. A lot of great material in here, especially this sharp cut between Yoda, Jinn, and Mace and their competing philosophies. But again, if you're not really into the lore, or you're only a kind of passive fan, it's all going to fly by your head and be like, why are they spending so much time on this? Why don't they just move on? But it's really well done. The framing is amazing, how everybody looks like they're in these poses. It's as if they're in a inquisition or religious kind of indoctrinated meeting, this kind of cultish atmosphere. So that's very well done. So overall, a very good setup for the end, but I still think they needed to structure this a little bit better. And as always, Lucas's writing needs to be a little bit sharper, but still very good and definitely a legitimate greatest of all time. So we're going to finish up with the final scenes with Darth Maul and Palpatine and his plot, and then we're going to do a couple more videos on the more thematic issues within Phantom Menace. This is Star Wars Analyzed, doing a revisionist case for Phantom Menace. Star Wars Analyzed. Thanks for listening. If you like the content, please like or subscribe. Thanks again.